so we can go ahead and proceed. So to kick off the meeting, I want to note that Senator Przonski is unable to attend today and virtually, and so and as is Commissioner Bozovich, who's the vice chair of this meeting. So I will be kind of shepherding us through this process, but of course you all have the votes and can direct the work of this committee. So with that in mind, I'll go ahead and get started with the presentation I have prepared. Okay. So for today's meeting, we are principally taking a look at the supplemental round funding requests. And so the materials, which include the applications as well as the funding request requirements, you can find those in the calendar invite for today's meeting. And so if you want to take a look at those, you're welcome to do that. And then in terms of what we have on the agenda for today, we'll be taking roll, doing a quick meeting overview, and then we'll jump into the review of the supplemental round funding requests. As have been submitted, we'll have an opportunity for public comment, and then you all will take action on the supplemental funding request. We staff have developed a few different funding recommendations that you can consider to help you make your final decisions, but ultimately you all are the decision makers. And then once we have, you all have made the supplemental funding round requests decisions, we would like to preview our newest justice reinvestment dashboards, which will give you a glimpse of how we will review justice reinvestment grant applications in this next cycle. So we'll preview the dashboards, and we're pretty proud of it, but we'd love to get your feedback on it and preview it for you all. So with that, I will go ahead and maybe pause here and note the attendance. So as I noted earlier, Senator Przonski and Commissioner Bozovich have indicated that they will not be able to join us today. So DA Perlow, I believe you're on the line.
I am. My mouth is full.
I'm sorry, bad timing. Chief Scales, I don't believe he's able to attend, but Chief, are you on? Okay. Sheriff Reese, I saw you pop on.
I'm present.
Great, thank you, Sheriff. And then Justice Nelson, I don't believe she's able to attend today. Okay. Lisa, I saw you on as well.
Yep, present.
Great. Representative Krupp?
I'm here.
Excellent, thank you. Nate, are you here?
Yes, sir, here.
Perfect. And then Sarah?
Yep, I'm here.
Excellent, okay. Okay, so before we dive into the setup for this and then reviewing the supplemental round funding requests, are there any questions about what we have in store for today? Okay, great. So first, we will briefly review one piece of Oregon administrative rule that impacts the decisions you make today. And so OAR 213-060-0080 dictates how we, and by extension you all, make recommendations around justice reinvestment funding, well, certain kinds of justice reinvestment funding. So we have $423,000 available to make award decisions with today. However, of that 423,000, approximately 150,000 of the available funding will be, and this is per OAR, will be prioritized for counties funding programs for historically underserved communities, including rural communities, racial, ethnic, and minority communities, and tribal communities. And so You, of course, can decide that all of the funding, all $423,000 of the funding can be prioritized that way, but we have to prioritize at least the 150,000 that way. So we as staff, when we set out to release this funding opportunity, we included a question in the grant applications. It's the last question, and it was a question where we asked them to identify how and if they fit within, if their request fit within the definition outlined in OAR 213060. And all 11 applicants responded to that question. Most of them indicated that they did qualify in some regard. And so if everyone says, yes, we qualify, that doesn't, that poses some challenges as you think about prioritizing funding. And so we as staff, we looked at these questions a lot of different ways, and where we have settled and what our recommendation is that there is a distinction between a program that includes funding or a program that includes services for a historically underserved community versus a program that targets or serves exclusively an underserved community. So there were several counties that indicated that they serve either a rural population or an impoverished population. And where we landed was that, to use the rural population as an example, if the program request itself was targeted to serve the rural population, for example, if it was to address transportation inequalities or housing inequalities within rural Oregon, then that would qualify as a targeted program. It's not just we include services to those populations. So it's a program that specifically serves one of those underserved communities. So I want to just pause here to see if the way we have landed, where we have the framework that we've settled upon, the distinction between include services for versus targeted funding for makes sense, because it could impact how you all think of decisions moving forward.
That makes sense to me, Ian.
Okay, great. And so using this framework, we've identified that 4 of the 11 counties have a program that is targeted for one of these underserved communities. So we'll go ahead and identify those 4 counties as we go through the applications one by one. So here's a couple graphical representations of what the supplemental funding round requests are. So as you can see here, our total requests were $740,000. However, we only have $423,000 available in funding. And then the budget requests themselves look very different. And as staff, excuse me, as staff, I think it's important to note that when we set out this funding opportunity, we specifically said that you can ask for what you need. And so if none of these requests are out of bounds, because they identify a need that the county has. And so even if one county asks for a little and another one asks for a lot, we viewed these requests similarly. But of course, as we think about making hard decisions, and they will be hard decisions, it definitely informed our approach to staff recommendations, which we will lay out to you after we go through the grant applications. And so I think it's important to note that these are hard choices all around. We have a little more than half, we have funding to cover a little bit more than half of the requests. And so we reached out to sorry, I want to say here that I can't actually see if somebody raises their hand Did I miss a comment or something from earlier?
Ian, it was just me. I wanted clarification, but I think you're going to clarify earlier or later on about the marginalized community. Because even looking at the first one, or one of the first ones, it was female, and I don't see that as one of those. So like, is gender underserved community qualification?
Great question. We decided that a gender-specific program, if it was a female-specific program, would qualify, that it would be a historically underserved community.
Thank you.
So to help inform some of these hard decisions, we reached out to each of the 11 counties and we asked them to develop a priority of their funding requests. And in some cases, we asked follow-up questions of the grantees. For example, there were a few requests that asked for more time or money than was available. There was at least one request that asked for 13 months of funds when there was only 12 months left in the year, for example, or for others, there were, they intended to hire for a new position, but the realities of it meant that it would be likely that they could actually only fund the position for 10 months. So these were we relied very heavily on the requests of the counties themselves. And so that informs much of what we call our base staff recommendations, which we'll get to in a moment. But in any event, these staff recommendations, they are not binding. We just know that your preference is to have staff recommendations to help inform your ultimate decisions. And so that's what how we approached it this time. So one interesting wrinkle with the Justice Reinvestment Grant is that it is a 24-month grant over a 30-month period. And so for this current biennium, we're in the 21-23 biennium. The biennium itself runs from July of 2021 until June of 2023. However, because funding decisions are not made until typically the end of November or December of 2021, we have historically allowed counties to have an extra 6 months of a grant project period. So instead of an 8-quarter grant, we functionally have a 10-quarter grant. Now, what this results in is counties that operate grant programs in different ways. There are some counties like this County A that start spending money as soon as July 1 rolls around. And so even if the check hasn't been cut for them, they're spending down the grant and then actually using the money once they have it in hand. Others wait a little bit longer, and so it's still a 24-month grant, but it's spread out differently. And then this County C, for example, doesn't get started until Q3. And so there's a lot of variation of what this looks like. The reason we bring this up, though, is because we focused on funding counties for the 24 months. And so if a county had already spent down or was approaching spending down all of their grant funds already, and they asked for enough money to run a 30-month grant program, we opted to fund it only, or we are suggesting to only fund it for 24 months because the next grant cycle will cover the remainder. And then, of course, as we talk about time, it's, I think, important to consider the time limitations that we have before us. So all of these grant funds need to be spent by December 2023. And so different requests, of course, have different constraints. So services, housing, supplies, or equipment, they can very likely be spent down that full 12-month period. If a decision is made by the commission next week, they could already start spending down money January 1. Now, if it's a personnel, that might be a little bit harder to do. Perhaps it takes 2 months to hire, and then the position is around for only 10 months. Because hiring often takes time, especially in this hiring environment. And for training, for example, training is often a one-off experience, and so it doesn't span the whole period. But it's just another example of how the different kinds of requests may have different time limitations on them. So I want to pause here before we get to the grant applications themselves and see if there's any questions around our staff recommendations or what compose the decision-making matrix for us. Okay. Nobody's speaking up and I can't see you if you're raising your hand, so I'm gonna just head on. Okay. So
You're
as I
doing
mentioned,
great, Ian.
thanks, Nate. So for the grant applications themselves, there were 11 grant applications, and the applications were as streamlined as we could have made them. We asked for just a handful of items. We asked them to identify what their budget was, their current grant spending level. So if they were only at 30% spending, that would be a problem because we would have some questions as to whether or not giving them additional funding would be appropriate. So all of the requests, with the exception of, I believe, one or two, were at more than 50% of spending. For the ones that were a little bit below 50%, they identified their plan of spending. So we as staff don't have any concerns with their ability to spend down the remaining funds. We also asked them to identify if it was a new or an existing grant, and then to describe how those funds would be used, and then to identify which of the goals of justice reinvestment this new or existing program serves. And then that last question was that question dealing with the Oregon administrative rule about serving historically underserved communities. And so we asked them if they qualified for that. And so all of these questions then inform the information that we are providing now. So I'll go ahead and go through each of these 11 counties one by one. If at any point you have questions or you'd like to talk about one of these counties in particular, we can of course take a pause and do that. All right. So Benton County, they are asking for a little bit more than $17,000 for electronic monitoring. We fund their pretrial program already with existing justice reinvestment grant funds. And so this would allow them to purchase 3 continuous alcohol monitors and a wireless base station kit. And so that continuous alcohol monitor provides 24/7 transdermal alcohol testing. And that's done every 30 minutes. It grabs a sample, and this would only of course, be assigned to somebody who has a condition based on a condition of release. Let me try that again. It would only be assigned to somebody who has a conditional release where the condition is that they do not drink. And then they're requesting funding for 20 Scram GPS bracelets, and it allows for location tracking. And so if somebody has a do not enter this particular area, for example, this device comes with an optional cell phone app that provides victims an alert if the defendant comes within a certain distance of the victim's phone. So this would be an enhancement of the existing pretrial program that we fund, and the goal would be to ensure court attendance and reduce prison usage. Okay, any questions with Benton County? Next is Deschutes County. So they are one of the 4 counties that we have identified as their request targets a historically underserved community. So they are asking for a little bit more than $20,000 for a gender-specific cognitive behavioral therapy in-person training and materials for 14. So they're looking to restart their gender-specific CBT services. Previously, they offered a gender-specific program, but it was suspended due to COVID-19. And so they have, if awarded, this funding will go to providing training for 14 individuals. They've indicated that they would open the slots beyond Deschutes County if, for example, they could only fill 10 of those slots with Deschutes County individuals. And so this would be an expansion of their existing CBT program. However, this would be focused primarily on female individuals or women. And so this would, in terms of a goal, would reduce prison usage for the female population.
This is Patty. Can I ask a question?
Please.
So they had this program in the past specifically for women and then dismantled it due to COVID and are saying that they don't have the funds to restart a program that they already had.
So this funding would go towards training. What I imagine what happened is that they had individuals who are no longer either up to date on their training or there's been turnover enough to where not everyone is trained on this that would need to be able to run the CBT program.
Okay, thanks for the clarification.
And they identified in the application materials that they might choose Moving On, which was a gender-specific CBT program that they used in the past, but they're also considering other gender-specific options. So it may be an entirely different CBT program that they end up using. Yeah. Next is Douglas County. So the first request that you will have seen in their application was for a qualified mental health professional. And they have, in conversation with Douglas County, they have actually asked that we rescind or that we remove that ask from their ask. So that's why you see the strike through there. And so they are now only asking for $600 for moral recognition therapy training, $1,500 for travel, and then just shy of $4,000 for supplies. And this would be an expansion of their that program, which is an in-custody treatment program in their local jail. And the goal of this would be to reduce prison usage.
Ian, first of all, it sounds like you are not feeling well, so kudos for like pulling through this meeting, and my apologies. Did they give a reason why they, or does it even matter? I mean, I think that was an important component, but also they probably have a really good reason.
Yeah, they decided that it is still something that they would like to fund, but they're going to explore other options like dual credentialing. They already have certified alcohol and drug counseling within the RZAP program. And there were just some educational, I'm forgetting the particulars, but I think the QMHP position needed advanced education that they were unable to find within a quick enough time, I think. So
Thanks, Ian.
All right, so Lane County. Lane County has two requests in here. The first is just shy of $17,000 for crisis funds for housing assistance. So this would fund housing applications, the first, last, the deposits, and it would assist with closing any gaps in monthly rent payments. And the goal of this program would be to reduce prison usage. And then the second piece here is the electronic monitoring program, which is very similar to the Benton County electronic monitoring request. This would be for 18 no-fee bracelets for pretrial defendants, so they would not charge any money for the defendants that would be placed on electronic monitoring as a condition of their release. And the goal here would be to reduce recidivism. And this is an expansion of two existing programs funded through Justice Reinvestment. Okay. If there's no other questions, I'll go ahead and proceed to Marion. So Marion is one of the 4 counties requests that we identified as where their request targets a historically underserved community. They are requesting a full-time probation and parole officer that will work with a gender-specific caseload. And so this PO would work exclusively with women. In addition to funding the position, they are requesting $750 in training for the Pathways to Change training. And then they're asking for just shy of $15,000 in admin. This would be a new program, and the goal of this would be to reduce recidivism and prison usage, specifically for the female prison population. Morrow County, they are asking to fund a lipstick coordinator. So they're asking for $32,000. And this is an existing program, but kind of not an existing program. This is a program that was funded through Justice Reinvestment funds. However, they exhausted those funds 2 or 3 months ago. And so this would be a continuation of that program with a little bit of a blip in between. They're also asking for $5,000 in emergency housing funds. This has a somewhat interesting structure where law enforcement would actually be given these funds, and they would be able to pay for temporary housing for individuals during the time frame when PACO, which is the Community Action Program of East Central Oregon, is not open. So normally CAPECO would be able to help individuals find housing. However, I think it has a normal 8 to 5 type schedule or hours of operation. So this would help, or I guess give the resources to law enforcement to where if they were to come across individuals in need of temporary housing, that they could get that temporary housing until CAPECO were to open its doors, either the next day or the next week. They're also asking for a little less than $4,000 for lock boxes for prescriptions. This would be part of a new medication assisted treatment program. And this would help ensure that the prescriptions given to individuals are kept and as for the intended recipient of the prescriptions. And then a new program would be $1,000 for fentanyl test strips, and this would be with a goal of reducing overdose deaths. And then they're asking for a little more than $4,000 in administrative funds, and the goal of their total request is to reduce recidivism and prison usage while promoting public safety. Any questions for Morrow County? Okay. So Multnomah County, as you may have seen in the application, is actually 3 different requests. So the county itself didn't make a request. However, 3 of their victim service providers did. And so Multnomah County's request is functionally 3 requests in one. And so we'll go ahead and go through each of the requests one by one. So the first of those requests is, and this is, these programs are placed in the order that they are because that is the priority ranking that Multnomah County placed them in. And so the first organization is the Oregon Crime Victims Law Center, and their total request is for about $20,000. The bulk of that would be for a 0.2 full-time equivalent pool attorney. And then there would be additional costs, which you can see here for communications, translation services, professional insurance, bar association dues, and on and on. And so this would be an expansion of an existing victim services program. And one of the questions we had was whether or not this position could increase immediately. This is an existing position. However, this would be an increase in the amount of time that this pool attorney would be able to work with clients. And so they could immediately start January 1, which was one of our concerns. And then the goal here would be public safety. The second request is ERCO, and they're asking for a little less than $60,000. And they The bulk of that would go to a half-time survivor services advocate. And then they would also are asking for funds for monthly interpretation or / translation services, for some office space, office supplies, postage, copying, insurance, client life stabilization and justice system costs, mileage, some cell phone costs, laptop, as well as some administrative costs. And this would be an expansion of an existing victim services program with the goal of public safety. The last of the three requests is from Lutheran Community Services Northwest. They're asking for $50,000. The bulk of that would go towards expanded office space for their victim services program. They're also asking for a little less than $4,000 in utilities, some funds for internet and phone, $10,000 for client assistance, and then a little bit of money for training, some money for a desk, and then administrative costs as well. This, like the others, would be an expansion of existing victim service program, and the goal would be to increase public safety. Any questions on this request or any of the three requests from Multnomah County?
Are we considering them individually or as a collective Multnomah County request?
The way Multnomah County would like us to view them is as individual requests. So Lutheran Community Services Northwest is different from ERCO, different from Oregon Crime Victims Law Center, excuse me. That being said, you're welcome to pay for, all of one portion except for two of the line items in request. So you can pick and choose however you want.
And math isn't my best subject. What was the total ask for Multnomah County?
Total ask would have been $125,000.
They always are asking for the most, aren't they?
Interestingly enough, they weren't the biggest ask this time, but yeah, they're often really high up there.
All right, thanks.
Mm-hmm. So the next county is Umatilla County, and they're one of the four counties that we identified as where their request targets a historically underserved community. They're asking for $14,000 for basic needs and transitional housing. And this would be an expansion of their existing care program, which you may remember from their original request. And excuse me. So the care program is a program where their target population includes underserved individuals identified through a equity and underserved persons committee that they have established. They use Oregon Health Authority's REAL-D assessment tool to help inform those decisions, but it's targeted on persons who are high risk or medium risk to recidivate, women, and especially those with children, and those identified through that assessment that require focus on basic needs, including food, housing, employment, medical, and then culturally specific services. So based on those needs, they then refer out. And so the goal of this program would be to reduce recidivism and prison usage. Any questions for Umatilla County? Next up is Wasco County. They're asking $93,000 to expand their Bridges to Change program. It's a transitional services program, and then $24,000 for their Wings transitional services program. And then this request would continue the services at their current level into the next biennium. So Wasco County is one of those counties where they start spending July 1 of a biennium. And so they anticipate to spend down all of those funds by April of 2023. And so this request would be for 8 months. So it would, if their full request was to be funded, it would be for 30 months of funding as opposed to 24 which is what we have historically done. And so the goal of this program is to reduce prison usage and recidivism. Any questions about Wasco County? Okay. Washington County, this is the fourth, or I guess final program that we identified as being a request that targets a historically underserved community. This program may sound familiar to you all. It's the HEAT program, which because of the capacity building grant that you all awarded last time, is a new program that Washington County is standing up. So HEAT is the Habilitation, Empowerment, Accountability Therapy. It's an Afrocentric holistic approach to recovery. And so they're requesting funding to cover a full-time probation officer, and then they are requesting $10,000 contract to expand upon the partially funded recovery mentor that was, I believe, was awarded $35,000 with the capacity building grant. So this would build upon that, and then they're asking for $10,000 in flex funds, and that would include bus tickets, incentives, basic needs, transportation, ID replacement, eyeglasses, emergency housing, those kinds of requests. And this is a new program, and the goal identified in this program is to reduce prison usage and recidivism. Any questions about Washington County's request?
Ian, I think I saw it in there, but the probation officer would be tasked as part of the Afrocentric caseload, right? Like,
Correct.
okay,
Yeah,
thank you.
they'd be working exclusively with Black men.
Perfect, thanks.
Okay. And then the last request is Yamhill County. They're asking for $10,000 for transitional housing, $3,300 for their victim service provider, Juliet's House, which is a children's advocacy and intervention center. They're asking $10,000 for the National Drug Court Professionals Conference. So they would send 4 individuals there. This would cover the cost of travel as well as registration. And then they're asking $10,000 for the National Adult Protective Services Association Conference, which is a pretrial conference. And then they're asking for $3,000 to cover administrative costs. This would be an expansion of 2 of their existing justice reinvestment grant programs, their pretrial justice program and their smart sentencing program. And the goal of these requests are to reduce prison usage and recidivism. So with that, that concludes the staff presentation for the 11 requests. And unless there's any questions, we can go ahead and roll on to the public comment but I'll pause here to see if there's any questions. Okay. So we have a chance for public comment. Are there any members of the public on this line that would like to provide comment?
Ian, are the applicants allowed to speak up at this point?
Yes, they would be.
I believe that Brandy Radati with ERCO is online and may want to make a point about her application.
Please.
Thank you, Lily. My name is Brandy Radati. I work for Immigrant Refugee Community Organization. So our ask is that we serve human trafficking survivors that are, and we specifically, there are a lot of services for specifically for sex trafficking in Oregon, but not for labor trafficking, and especially not many services for language and culturally specific. So the FTE is a position we already have. That person is already on board. It's just supplementing so that we'd have more funds for direct services. We spend a lot of our money helping people escape and get into safe places. We help people stabilize. So 100%, the focus of our program is our direct services for people who are highly vulnerable, and specifically for people with language and cultural needs. So I just wanted to make sure that part was not lost.
Thank you, Brandy. Would anyone else like to offer public comment? Okay. So I was expecting this to take a little bit longer, so I built in a break. If you all would like, we can still take the break now. If not, we can move forward.
I'd prefer to just keep on pushing forward.
Let's do it then.
Yeah, me too. Let's move forward, Ian.
I concur.
Okay. Okay, so as a reminder, the decisions before you are hard decisions. You have $423,000 in available funding, and you have a combined total request of $700 and almost $40,000. And so, as you can see, the requests vary quite a bit. And so the largest request is Marion County, and the smallest is Douglas County. And the differences between those requests are significant. And so, as I mentioned earlier, we as staff, we reached out to the counties individually and asked them to prioritize their funding requests. And so this information then formed the basis of what we're calling our base staff recommendations. And so I'll go ahead and go through these one by one, but I'd like to stress here that these recommendations principally reflect the requests of the counties, their preferences, and then as well as the staff recommendations based on feasibility and the limitations of available funding. And so if you all were to adopt these base staff recommendations, they will get you to just shy of $66,000 of hitting that funding amount. And so on the next slide, I'll show you 4 other scenarios where if you accept these base staff recommendations, you can then pick and choose. And of course, you can choose one by one whether or not to accept these recommendations, but this is at least a starting point. So the first base staff recommendation is that many of the counties requested to cover administrative costs, and we are recommending, given the very large nature of the request, that you do not fund any administrative requests. And that for Benton County, that you do fund their Scram GPS program. Or Deschutes County, that you fund 90% of their request. For Douglas, that you fund their MRT training, their travel and supplies. For Lane County, you fund 90% of their request. For Marion County, you fund 10 months of a probation and parole officer. For Morrow County, that you fund their lipstick coordinator, the lock boxes, and fentanyl test strips. And for Multnomah County, that you fully fund the Oregon Crime Victims Law Center and IRCO requests. For Umatilla County, you fund 80% of their request. And then for Wasco, that you fund 2 months of their extension request. And for Washington County, you fund 75% of their request. And Yamhill County, you fund 90% of their request. So if you were to accept these staff recommendations, you'd be then just $66,000 away from in additional cuts to allow you to finalize this. And so we have put together a few different scenarios for you to consider, or at least as a starting point to consider. So if you do accept these base staff recommendations that I just went through, your scenario 1 would be to accept those recommendations and then reduce Marion County's probation position by 1 additional month. So you'd fund it for 9 months as opposed to 10 months. And then you do not fund the IRCO funding requests. And then everyone else receives a 0.32% cut. So for Douglas County, that's going to cost them a little less than $20. For Marion County, that's a reduction of $350. But then, of course, IRCO doesn't get any money. And so alternative scenario 2, where you accept the base recommendations, and then everyone except for Deschutes, Marion, Umatilla, and Washington, which we identified as being eligible for priority funding consideration, they would receive a 28.44% cut. Scenario 3 is where you accept the base recommendations, and then you give a 13.38% cut for everyone. And you could do that while still abiding by the Oregon administrative rules conditions, because the prioritization only applied to $150,000 in requests, and the cumulative funding of those 4 counties that we identified would be in excess of that $150,000. And then scenario 4 is if you disregard our base recommendations, you could just do a uniform haircut of 42.77% cut for everyone. We would strongly recommend against doing that because that doesn't take into account the preferences of the counties that form the basis of the base recommendation. And of course, you could, choose scenario 1, but choose to fund ERCO, and any variation. You could kind of pick and choose and tailor these. As I mentioned earlier, we built a spreadsheet to where we can almost in real time take into account your requests or suggestions, and then we can spit out answers to answer your questions of what the impact would be to different counties. So I'll pause here to see if there's questions, and then maybe we can, you all can have a conversation on what you would like to do.
So Ian, I have a couple of questions.
Mhm.
On the base recommendation, the 4 counties that had the underserved, are those all completely funded or not?
They are not. So our staff recommendations took into account their willingness to accept some cuts. And so, for example, Marion County, they would qualify as a priority county under our methodology, but their request is to fund a position for 12 months. It's very unlikely they'll be able to hire in 2 weeks. So we are suggesting, okay, 10 months. And Marion County said, yeah, okay, 10 months is a better request.
Okay. And then was ERCO taken into account? Because that would be an underserved population. And I know Marion identified Oregon Cricket, the law center. But to me, having the underfunded sorry.
Yeah. No,
you know what I'm saying, right?
I do know what you're saying. Yeah.
Okay.
So our base staff recommendations do not have any cuts to ERCO. And so you would fully fund ERCO under the base staff recommendations. And so while we didn't identify them as one of the 4 priority counties, because we kind of looked at them county by county, if you deemed that they were fit within that priority categorization, then you could choose an option using the base staff recommendations that kept ERCO whole. Does that make sense?
Yes. Last question, not funding administrative requests. Does that hamper anybody, especially like your smaller communities who rely on that money? Do you know if it unfairly disadvantages people?
I might actually ask Nate to answer that. I don't know if I'm can answer that on behalf of the smaller counties.
Will you ask that question again?
So sometimes I know, coming from a smaller organization in the past, I relied on those administrative monies to pay my salary as the executive director. And so in smaller counties, smaller organizations, that admin money means a whole lot more than maybe somebody in Marion or Lane or Multnomah. So I'm just kind of trying to understand the impact of not including administrative requests. As much as that might be an easy cut for some, it might be preventative for other smaller counties.
Yeah, so I can speak to Josephine County in that I know we have a local policy that says that any of the contracts we're supposed to request, it's like a mandate that we request the admin fee, but it's not a deal breaker. I know there has been some exceptions, but you're absolutely right. There's a heavy dependence on those administrative fees, but sometimes there's workarounds. You know, we as smaller counties, we're pretty creative in getting programs, you know, put up and ran. So I appreciate that concern very much so, but I think people are pretty savvy as it relates to creativity for the smaller counties to make them work.
Thank you.
Other questions?
Ian, this is Sheriff Mike Reese in Multnomah County.
Mhm.
I have a question in regards to the base recommendation. I appreciate your staff doing this. I think it helps us fine tune our decision-making process. And I noticed in several of the requests, there were conferences and things of that nature. Does the base recommendation exclude those? A couple of them were fairly expensive, and while I value the ability to go to meetings of associations when we're having to make difficult cut decisions, that may be an area where we could help to narrow the requests and the gap right now, the $66,000 gap.
Yeah, that's definitely something that you all could take a critical look at. When we reached out to the counties, there were a few counties that said, hey, you could cut this, but for the most part, as you can kind of see on the slide, they thought of it in percentage requests. So Yamhill County, a big chunk of their request is for training. And so that 90% would impact the amount that is ultimately awarded to the training, but it's not a targeted cut on the training request, if that makes sense.
Ian, I had a question on scenario 1. That's
Yeah.
the one I'm kind of leaning towards. But as it relates to Marion County's position by eliminating it by 1, I'm looking at their application. That just means they're only going to get $750, right? Is that?
Marion County?
Yeah, isn't that under scenario 1? If you reduce Marion County position by one additional month. I was thinking one additional
Oh,
FT
yeah.
person.
when-
Okay, never mind. Should have read it.
Yeah, so we would fund 9 months as opposed to 10.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
Hey, Ian, it's Sarah. I have one question about Marion County's application. So I don't know if I would have noticed this if it wasn't such a large application, but they marked no that the application hadn't been reviewed and approved by their local LIPSIC. Is that typical? Do we care about that?
Yeah, so that question was included as an optional question. I don't know if it actually shows up that way. No, it doesn't in the printed version, but that was mainly for our staff benefit. We did not require a LIPSIC approval, especially because of the tight turnaround. Larger counties, like for example, Marion and Lane, it's sometimes harder to get the LIPSIC together. But that was mainly for our own staff benefit to get a glimpse of how involved a LIPSIC might be in this decision making.
As much as it disappoints me to say this, this is a perfect example of when it would be easier to be in person and we could see and have control over what we were looking at. Right. The spreadsheet that you created, Ian, is that something that does some side by side so that we can look at a bigger picture?
It doesn't do side by side. The way we have it structured is that we have a base recommendations and then we have different sheets actually of different scenarios. And so with these 4 scenarios, we could tell you right away how much each county would get. If you wanted to tweak them, we would just we would copy a sheet and then work off of another. And so we could screen share the sheet itself. I don't know how helpful that would be, just because they're pretty massive spreadsheets, but we could tell you this is how much Douglas gets, this is how much whomever gets, and on and down the line, if that would be helpful.
Because the applications are really clunky to go through.
Mm-hmm.
And so, just sort of a summary side by side is what I'd really like to see. And I guess that's not an option. I've looked at the applications, but like I said, when you open them up and try to scroll through, it's clunky.
Yeah. When
So
you
I'm
say
wondering,
oh, go
is
ahead.
there any, I mean, I don't know, I'd like to like just get a head count of like, is there some basic agreement? Is there anybody who's like fundamentally disagreeing with the base recommendations at this point? Because I mean, I think that's a helpful tool to start, right? So we can like move to the pennies and dollars, but
I do not disagree with the base recommendations. But I can't have that up at the same time that I look at what the cut scenarios are.
so
Yeah,
and
I
could you
really
create more
appreciate
screens?
I appreciate those base recommendations because it tells me that there was some sort of a process and exercise that all of these different counties went through to prioritize what it is that, you know, will be realistic in standing up their programs. And then the others, the scenarios outside of scenario one that I have, you know, some concerns about is that if we made cuts across the board, oftentimes similar to what was discussed earlier, oftentimes if you cut it too much, the program can't be even, you know, started, right? So I feel like the cut for everyone at, you know, 0.32% is more realistic. And then we can have those clear expectations of saying, hey, we're not going to fund ERCO, Multnomah County. And then the reduction of Marion County's position by only 1 month, that just means that they're going to delay their recruiting process for that additional month. So my feeling is scenario one is what I'm really leaning towards at this time.
I would agree on everything except for the ERCO cut. I would rather see us cut Oregon Crime Victim Law Center or whatever. I know that's my like Multnomah's priority, but our priority is to serve underserved populations. And if that's the case, then ERCO to me outranks. And I'm not just saying that because somebody's here from ERCO. I think it's great that the victims programs are getting funded, but to me, that's more important because it targets some of those underserved populations. Other than that, I agree.
And was that discussed at all with Multnomah County? In terms of the priorities, they talked about ERCO and the other one.
I don't know if Multnomah County in their Justice Reinvestment Steering Committee talked about that when they decided on their priority list. I'm not sure.
And
Ian, you do have somebody from Multnomah County's Lipsick, Lily Yamamoto's, I believe, participating in this, if you want to ask that question.
Lily, do you feel comfortable answering that question?
Yes, we support all of our applicants, but they all focus on underserved communities, include the no-cost legal representation and ERCO specifically. And a lot of the legal services are in East County, Multnomah County, which is, you know, how do you describe that? It's in general an underserved community. So we discussed that question specifically, and that was the conversation out of JRSC, the prioritization.
Thanks, Lily.
Thank you, Lily. I would also point out that victims of crime are overrepresented of the population of people of color, transgender, a lot of the biased crime, people's rights being violated by the courts are overrepresented by underrepresented populations. And so I would encourage not eliminating, I would encourage following the recommendation of Multnomah County.
So I want to pause here to confirm that you all are okay with adopting the base recommendations. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
I
Yes.
agree. I agree.
Okay, good. So I have excellent news. You just made your lives a lot easier. This was total $250,000. And so you are just need to find an extra $66,000. And so what I'm hearing, I mean, one scenario that we could take a look at is a scenario one that doesn't impact ERCO. And we can run those numbers to give you all a better sense of what that percentage cut might look like. Is that something that you all would like us to run as a scenario 1.5 maybe?
Could we look at partially funding ERCO?
Do you have specific line items in mind?
Let me scroll through just a minute.
Well, like funding program and services or direct services as opposed to some of the other things that were in the ask.
Yeah. Oops. Okay, so here's the request.
Thank you.
So I assume that would be, yes, fund the survivor services advocate and interpretation services.
Well, I guess it would depend. I would say yes, or just the survivor services advocate, depending on how that impacts the rest.
Okay.
And Ian, while you're doing some math, this is Mike Reese, maybe look at the administrative costs associated with this request, and office space is maybe a way to narrow the gap as well.
Yeah, will do. Thank you, Sheriff. So Avery, Catherine, and Hannah, they're the ones working the spreadsheet. Let's take a look at what happens if we cut all office space related things. So office space, office supplies, postage, copying, mileage, cell phone, laptop. And then when you all adopted the base recommendations, we cut the $6,000 in administrative costs. So that would leave in place the survivor services advocate, at least for now, the client life stabilization justice system costs, and then the $2,200 in monthly interpretation translation services. Oh, so here's a bit. If we were to do scenario one, but keep ERCO, let me toggle over. So if we were to do scenario one, but fully fund ERCO, it would just be a 1% cut for everyone instead of a 0.32%. So for a $20,000 request, it's still not that much money. So that could be an option.
I could get on board with that. Oh, Lisa's talking, I think.
Lisa, I think you're muted.
I was muted. What about looking at Oregon Crime Victims Law Center the same way that,
Oh, sure.
not fund the office supplies and things like that?
Okay. So let's see here. That'd be not funding the communications, professional insurance, maybe bar association dues, computer services maintenance, and office supplies. Okay. Avery, we just rattled off a whole bunch of things. Do you want us to pause and re-say them?
Just getting to lock really much the back end.
Trying to unmute. Computer's freezing.
We can hear you, Avery.
Oh, you can?
Yes.
Okay, that's great. Yeah, so we just made those cuts from the ERCO requests.
Okay.
And so that would be then a 10.42% cut across the board after you make those. So we will work on seeing what the percentage cut would be by taking out the Oregon Crime Victim Law Center as well.
Okay. So I'll restate those cuts. So that would be a cut to communications, professional insurance, bar association dues, computer services maintenance, and office supplies. And under this scenario, I think that's includes the additional reduction of 1 month for Marion County. So it'd be funding 9 instead of 10 months.
If we're doing that, should we also be, I've just thrown it out there for the final one, the Lutheran. We're picking on Multnomah County, but
So are you thinking of partially funding Lutheran Community Services?
well, I'm just, if we're going through these cuts with ERCO and why can't I remember the letters? Oregon Crime Victim Law Center. I don't know, and just throwing it out there because I'm like, we're scrutinizing Multnomah County way more than we probably are scrutinizing other programs, so.
We certainly could. I think I mean, at this point, it's just a question of how much of a percentage cut it is to everyone.
Am I understanding it right that the Lutheran services, which is not what it's called, but I don't have it open, is not funded in the base recommendation?
That is correct.
So the suggestion is to fund them, to add funding.
It actually wasn't. I was sorry about that. I was.
Oh, okay.
I thought they were funded in the base. That's my
Oh, okay.
mistake. I apologize. It's hard to keep track. I'm with Patty.
So I just got so if we were to do scenario 1, so making those additional Oregon Crime Victim Law Center cuts, that only took away an additional $2,100. So it would result if we fully fund, well, not if we mostly fund ERCO, if still cutting those office space cuts and then making targeted cuts to Oregon Crime Victim Law Center, it would be about a little bit more than a 10% cut across the board for everyone.
Even though your scenario 1 says 0.32% in the original scenario?
It's because we are now funding
Okay.
ERCO.
Got it. Thanks.
Ian, can you pull up I think there were 2 conference requests.
Mhm.
Can you take a look at those counties? It seems like one of them was like $10,000.
Yeah, Yamhill is requesting 20,000 in total, so that's 4 people for each conference. So that could be a cut there.
I would be down for that.
Okay. You know what? I think that might have been their priority request. I will look into that. But other training requests. Let's see.
So I look at training different than conference requests personally. I mean, I remember one of them has the CBT training. Like, to me, that's an essential part. The professionals conference is less critical to providing services. While I appreciate it, to me, it's less critical.
Right. Okay. So for Washington, or excuse me, Yamhill, would it be, yes, Cassie Poland from Yamhill County. Could you remind me again what the prioritization was for Yamhill County?
No, we actually prioritized the half, at least to be able to send two to each conference, especially the pretrial conference, because that really is the only training of conference available for our pretrial nationwide. But we would like to at least send half of each of those, 2 people to each conference.
Great, thank you.
But of course, you know.
So that would net you $10,000 if we were to reduce their training costs by half. We can run that scenario right now. Okay. So if we were to cut the Yamhill County training in half, that would result in a modified scenario 1, where we mostly fund ERCO. And so that would result in an 8.47% cut, in addition to whatever cuts we've done in the base recommendation. So while you all think on that, let me note this all down. So I'm going to call this the new scenario 1. So am I missing anything? So how do folks feel about that? Would you like to see what an 8.47% cut looks like to some of the counties? If so, you could say a county and then we can tell you a dollar figure.
I'm interested in some of the smaller asks. Maybe even just looking back at the base recommendation, because some of the cuts were already made. So it's in addition to whatever cuts were made in the base recommendation, and some of the requests were certainly smaller than others, and I'm interested in how those ones would be impacted by the cuts.
Sure. Okay. Yeah. So on the small end, we got Douglas and Umatilla. So we can pull up those amounts and let you know what the base recommendations plus the new scenario 1 cuts would look like to Douglas and Umatilla. So I would ask those that are manning the spreadsheet to let me know.
And also bless your team and thank you for their indulgence in this. These are hard choices.
They are hard choices, and yeah, definitely.
Ian, I know we postponed that break about, I don't know, an hour ago or so. Is there any chance that we could revisit that opportunity?
Certainly could. Before we go
Okay.
to break, I do want to say that for Douglas County, so the smallest request, that would result in $515 cut from their request. And so I think they requested less than $20,000. So a fair amount of money, but
Right.
also not. I guess
Right.
it depends on how.
Thanks, Ian.
Yeah.
So we're looking at taking a break and your team can catch up on the numbers.
Yeah.
Or
Is
maybe
there
do you
anything
want a
else
break? I don't know.
is there anything else you'd like us to look into over the next 10 minutes? Okay. So let's reconvene at 1:25, 1:27. Okay.
Could you flip back to the base slide so I can look at that?
Sure.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Let's maybe wait just a minute or two more for folks to return back from the break. While we're waiting on other folks, Lisa or Nate or others that are back, is there anything you'd like us to take a look at or different scenarios that you'd like us to consider?
Only
You
finding
know,
me more money.
as it relates to the info that you already have, I think it's, you know, at your fingertips. And quite honestly, I trust you all to make the best informed recommendations to this committee so we can, you know, move forward and make a recommendation. So no, there's nothing else that I can see that I want you to look at.
Okay. So I wanted to see if everyone is back. So I see um, Mike, Nate, and Lisa on the line. Okay, Sarah's back. Excellent. DA Perlow, are you back?
Yes.
Okay, great. Rep Krupp,
I'm back.
perfect. And I think that's everyone. Okay, perfect. So good afternoon, Justice Nelson.
Hello, I apologize for my lateness. I had to run another meeting and I just cannot multitask.
No worries. You got here just in time. We're at the
Good.
unpleasant part where we have to make hard decisions. So maybe to recap, so just before the break, what you all agreed to was accepting these base staff recommendations, which saved you $250,000, but got you within $66,000 of where you needed to be able to make those funds to award funds based on the limited funds that we do have. And so you asked us to consider scenario one, which accepts those base recommendations, reduces Marion County's position by 1 additional month, and then makes some targeted cuts to Oregon Crime Victims Law Center and then ERCO, and then funds only half of Yamhill County's training request. So that would result in needing to do an additional haircut of 8.47%. And so you asked us to consider what that would look like for the smaller counties making a request. And so for Umatilla County, which did receive a haircut in the initial base staff recommendations, their original ask was for $14,000. If you were to accept scenario one, they would receive $11,200. So they would not receive $2,800 of their initial request. Are there other counties that you'd like us to take a look at? That was the smallest request county that received a cut in the staff recommendation. Okay. So how do you all feel about the 8.47% cut for everyone?
Not great.
Yeah, that was a bad question. Fair point.
My
So what-
feeling, I'll just restate it, from, I think it's been an hour ago or so, but I think 8.47% is quite a large cut for, across the board. Again, for the same reasons that I outlined before, it's just difficult when we start cutting, deeply into some of these programs, without those funds. I can see something like, the 1% cut, but without some of these funds, the whole program doesn't get stood up. So anyway.
Is there any large scale cuts? I hate to say this, but of a position or something, I know they're all important, but is there a large scale cut that gets us to that amount that, I don't know, least?
Urco.
Yeah, so of the county.
I was thinking not culturally specific program. You know me.
So we could levy an additional cut to Washington County. They're the second largest cut request. They are, of course, one of those priority counties, but they have a little more flexibility to absorb those cuts than other counties, and that's something that they've passed along to us. And so the program would still be able to be stood up. Now, how much of an additional haircut I think matters a great deal, but an additional 5% cut. So right now you're funding them at 75%. If you were to then fund them at 70%, that would save you an additional $7,000. So it's some savings. It's still, I mean, by adding ERCO back in, that cost about $30,000. And so it's hard choices all around.
Ian, to Nate's point, if we were to look at, is there a natural break point? And I'm just looking at the graph, like Lane County through Douglas County. Those are smaller requests, maybe a smaller cut to them. I don't know what that would look like. And then a larger cut to the 4 remaining counties that have asked for more funding. 10% cut to Washington County might not be as devastating to their programs as a 1 or 2% cut to a Douglas County.
Sure. That's definitely something we can look at. I do want to just say that Wasco County, we're only funding, I don't know what the percentage would be, but they requested 8 months and we're only funding them for 2 months. So they're a lot smaller now. But of the 3 here, we could certainly look at that. So you're hoping to close that gap?
Yes,
Okay.
correct. Yep. A 10% for larger requests and maybe you should do the math. The total budget requested now has shifted dramatically for the counties with the base cuts and the decisions we've already made. Maybe look at the funding requests that are left and see if there's a way to narrow the gap with a larger cut to the ones that are still getting a large percentage of their request.
Sure. So Avery, could you maybe model out what a 10% cut would look like for Marion, Washington, and Multnomah, and then also a 15% cut just to give us some options?
Yes,
So
we can do that.
thanks, Avery. So give us a few minutes to do that, and then we'll have those figures back to you in a moment. Okay, so if we were to do a 10% cut just of those top 3 counties, so Washington, Multnomah, Marion, that would get you that would mean that everyone else gets a 1.49% cut across the board. So not yet to 1%, but a lot better than 8.47. And then we're calculating the 15% right now. So one moment. So I want to clarify one of the comments I said earlier. So I said that the 10% cut to the 3 largest counties would result in a 1.49% cut. That would actually be for all counties, including the 3 big ones. So it'd be functionally an 11.49% for the large counties with just a 1.49 to the smaller requests.
Ian, is it inappropriate to try to add a little more information about ERCO at this point? I know that you're close to decisions, but I think what's not clear is that just because ERCO is located in Multnomah County, at least half of the proposal or the folks they want to work with are not in Multnomah County. They serve the entire state of Oregon. So I don't know if that carries weight with folks, but I wanted to make sure folks knew that.
Thank you for that context, Lily. I'll leave it to the grant review committee to determine whether or not that impacts how you all are thinking about this. So actually, I guess now that I'm thinking about it, so with the 10% cut to the 3 largest counties, based on that new information, that may be like if ERCO is a statewide program, but being lumped into the Multnomah County category, it is cutting all of the Multnomah County requests by 10% when it otherwise might not. Because ERCO is $30,000 request. I think Multnomah County's total request was 125. So still would have been a larger request. It wouldn't be quite as large though. So our staff are still taking a look at the 15% modeling. But while they're doing that, I want to maybe just do a gut check on how everyone's feeling about the 10% modeling that they did. Would it be helpful if I wrote it down so you can all see it?
That would be very helpful.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm very much a visual learner, Ian. Thank you. Can I ask a question of who had represented that information about statewide services from ERCO? I think it was Lily, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, Lily, are you free to answer a question?
Good timing. Actually, we have Brandy here from ERCO.
Okay.
Oh, great. Okay. Is there, do you have any metrics that you could provide the group statewide, you know, outside of Multnomah County and specifically in Southern Oregon where we're located? And
Sure,
then,
so- I'm sorry.
and then my second part to that question is, if these cuts that are being proposed, how would that impact your services to outside of the metro area?
Okay, so we are ramping up our services for labor trafficking, which are 100% so far foreign-born. We have clients that are throughout Oregon, as far as all the way to Medford and Ontario. We have at least half of our current client low caseload are outside of Multnomah County. We have people, our only eligibility requirement is somebody who's been, is a survivor of human trafficking, either labor or sex or both, and they're adults living in Oregon. Now we have specific services, for example, bilingual programming in both English and Spanish, culturally specific programming. We have on-site immigration legal services, as well as our language interpretation bank for every language. We have people that are, we have several, I would say that only about, I would say less than half of our people are Spanish speaking at this time. We have various people from various locations needing different culturally specific services. So it's important because we don't limit just to Multnomah County. Our costs are going up. Trafficking is really flourishing during COVID. We are keeping families off the street. Like the focus is on people who are like underserved communities. So we are 100% working with the most vulnerable people who are out of their element of language, culture, on top of being the victim of some heinous violence and personal crimes. So being able to have these, it makes a difference between us being able to cover, for example, we have a blind survivor from Guatemala whose electricity was shut off right a couple days ago when it was really cold. And we were able to come in and help them. They're not in Portland, they are in Salem. And we were able to help them cover that. And because we have money to do so. And so because of that, her and her family, and she's already disabled and all these other things, we're able to have heat for the night. So these are the type of things we are not, this isn't a program that we're funding. We're funding like keeping people in their houses, giving people food, stuff for their clothes for their kids to go into school. So without the extra funding, we are really tightening our belts because the costs have really exploded. The amount of people on our caseload, the amount of people, before there were no TVAP, which is the trafficking clients, the TVAP program for people who have been human trafficked from who are foreign born is a program, but there are no providers in Oregon at all. So ERCO has taken on all those TVAP clients to provide services because otherwise those trafficking survivors who have gone through the TVISA program and are working with federal law enforcement would have no services, nothing to protect them or to help them to stay in housing, food, take care of their kids, to establish safety.
Thanks, Brandy. Nate, does that answer your question?
Yeah, that does. And then just to follow up, I'm reviewing some of the information in your packet here. So would that include some of the folks that are foreign born and then brought over here for the marijuana grows and different things like that? Have you run into that? Is that part of the expansion of services and the need increase?
So we have recently solidified our partnership with the Consulate of Mexico in Portland, which serves Mexican citizens throughout Oregon. And they have been doing rural, they go throughout the state to reach their citizens to explain different services. And we have been going with them to help to educate, because actually trafficking is very prevalent, especially in the migrant farmer workload. It's happening a lot. We haven't had any clients so far from the marijuana farms, but we know they're out there, and we are doing community outreach, and we are getting more and more hits. People who didn't realize there was help out there. People who, yeah, if I leave, but I'm not going to have anywhere to stay, no documents, no food, so maybe I'll just stay in this. Now they're seeing there's other opportunities. Now that we're getting the word out, there are people coming out of the woodwork. They're saying this is trafficking. Like, I was trafficked and I have nothing, but I'm ready to get out of it. So theoretically, yes, the marijuana farms can definitely be factored in. It hasn't been a factor so far, but as we do continuous outreach, I would say that will probably happen. The people who have been caught up in that will be needing services.
Thank you.
So I know, well, here's one option what we can do. So right now we're working through those calculations. It may still take us a few more minutes to finalize those. And we want to be able to give you, hard and certain numbers. And so we're doing our due diligence right now to make sure that what we're quoting you is accurate. We could temporarily pause this conversation and then pivot towards taking a look at the Justice Reinvestment dashboards, if you all would like to do that. Okay. All right. I saw nods. If somebody disagrees with that, we can certainly look at each other more on the screen. So, okay. So I will go ahead and stop sharing here, and then I will invite one of my colleagues, Carrie, to come and present the Justice Reinvestment dashboards. But before she maybe starts talking, I wanted to maybe set the context of this. So as you all will recall, during the main grant cycle, we take a look at the prison usage and recidivism for the vast majority of our counties in a PowerPoint format. And you often have questions about what is driving a particular spike in prison usage. And so we have spent the better part of a year developing tools to more clearly convey that information graphically. And so previously we were able to, look at the underlying data and say, oh, there was somebody who was arrested, charged, and then convicted or sentenced to prison for a 90-month sentence. Okay, that's an outlier. That's a very large spike in this given period. And so that is likely contributing to the prison usage spike that you're seeing graphically. But that wasn't something that we could ever represent visually to you all. And as we've chatted about here today, being able to see things visually is really helpful. And so with those challenges in mind, we set about designing new dashboards. And so, Carrie, I'll turn it over to you to maybe give them a glimpse at what this all looks like.
Sure. Thank you very much, Ian.
Carrie, are you there?
Yep, I'm here. Can you hear me? Sorry.
Yep, we can hear you.
Yep. Hopefully my puppy who kind of just picked this moment to start freaking out. We'll stay quiet for a few minutes here. Okay, so can you all see the screen?
Yes.
Reinvestment map and everything? Okay, great. So like Ian said, we've been working for a long time to try to update really kind of all of our dashboards. So this hopefully will get rolled out really soon. And the whole goal here is just to make the information more accessible, more usable, and more readily able to answer the questions that folks have about JRI and incarceration in general. So when you enter the JRI dashboard, whether from the report or the website, this is where you would land. So it's just, as you can see, a little bit of a summary of what the Justice Reinvestment Program is. And this is for sort of the general public that might find themselves landing here. So this page for the county programs replaces the old spaghetti diagram that I'm trying to link different counties to what types of programs are available. So we spent quite a bit of time trying to figure out what the general categories should be. So we've been working on categorizing all of the budget items from all of the counties for both the formula and supplemental into these 5 categories. And then several subcategories. Because services tend to be provided throughout different parts of the different categories here. They could be provided in pretrial, supervision, etc. We've kind of pulled those numbers out so that those are easy to access. So just to take sort of a quick example, if I want to look at Clackamas County's budget for justice reinvestment, they don't have supplemental, they only have formula. They're not spending money on trial. They have their biggest spend here is on monitoring. So if I actually want to know what those spends are, I can click on it and get the actual budget item as it was described in their application. So we can really quickly kind of see the budget breakdown by expense type there. And please feel free to jump in at any time if you have a question about any of this. So jumping now to prison use. So this plot here is what you would have seen typically before. This is what Ian was kind of just talking about, where you see these squiggles going up and down and you don't necessarily know what's driving it. So this is total months, the total length of stay by month here. So what we've done, that Ian was kind of alluding to, is broken that down into the actual sentence lengths and then the number of admissions. So the total length of stay is a function of both how many people are going to prison and how long they're staying there. And for a big county like Clackamas County, it's maybe not so obvious why. Like for the most part, the prison use plot is going to look just like the admission plot. But if we look at a county like Jefferson County, who's not currently a JRI county, but this is a pretty good example. They had this big outlier here earlier this year, and that caused their total prison use to spike from down here all the way to up here. And you can see their intakes were flat during that time. So they didn't increase the number of people. They just had one sentence that was really long. And because this plot is a rolling sum for 12 months, that one sentence is going to make this whole year from 2022 to 2023 look very high. So that is the kind of thing that we want both the counties and you all to be able to really quickly and easily identify if you're looking at something like that. And typically these long sentences are, there were multiple crimes. This wasn't a 111 months sentence probably for a single drug crime or a single property crime. And often they're also coming from multiple counties. So one admission actually has convictions sometimes from multiple counties. So, sometimes those single sentences are sort of not fair to judge the performance of the county in general. We can also look at this in terms of the rate, similar to what we have been able to do in the past. So this is now looking at the months per 100,000 people in the population. So you can imagine for some of the small counties, this can get pretty jittery, but it enables us to compare it to the state rate, which is this black line here. In addition, you can compare it to any other counties you want. So Jefferson County is in what we're calling the Newberry peer group. So if I wanted to compare their prison rates to Deschutes and Crook, which are the other counties in that Newberry peer group, I can add those to the plot and see how they're sort of doing compared to those counties. And I could add any county that I wanted, but we have these sort of recommended peer groups for folks to compare to. Okay, so to further be able to, look into what's driving prison use on an individual county basis, we have this sentencing page. So this is then going to break down how much prison use can be attributed to what type of JRI crime. So first sentence, probation, revocations, property, drug, and driving. Change this now. Shoots. So similar to what we saw on the prison page, this is also then broken down by the average sentence length for each of those crime types and the number of intakes for each of those crime types. So like in this example, you can see Deschutes County drug admissions has been pretty constant, but in the past year, the length of stay for those convictions has increased pretty dramatically. And this is probably a function of prosecuting only the more serious cases in this past year. But if I wanted to know more, in particular, if I was this county and I wanted to be able to sort of understand where my numbers were coming from and explain them, probably to you all or to their local councils and whatnot, I can actually click on that and then get a row by row look at what all those cases are. So this is, I clicked on first sentence for drug crimes, and this is all of their admissions in the past year for first sentence drug crimes. So they can go back and looking at this information, probably figure out what cases these were, why was this person a 44 plus month sentence. In this case, this is probably one where they did have a second conviction from another county because the sentence for Deschutes County was only 30 months. So, so they can look at it case by case. They can also look at how their sentencing compares to the state. So the average sentence length for first sentence drug crimes in Deschutes County for the past year was 27 months. And this purple histogram down here is showing convictions for that particular crime type across the state. And so statewide, our most common sentence length for first sentence drug crimes was 31 months. It was 27 months for Deschutes County. And so they're really pretty consistent with sentencing. There's nothing sort of standing out as being unusual there for sentencing. We are in the process of vetting our racial disparity page with both internally and some external stakeholders. As you can imagine, it's one that we want to make sure that we are getting absolutely correct, but the goal will be to have something that you all can look at, that when you're looking at your applications, you can kind of see how the JR programs are impacting different communities within each county. So we're going to hold off on looking that for today, but that is coming very shortly as well. And as you can see, this is also going to be, this whole thing is connected to the larger incarceration data. So from any point when you're in the JRI, if you decide you really want to go look at not just JRI prison use, but prison use for all crimes, for example, you can get there pretty easily. It's still filtered to the county that you were looking at. And then the graphics are pretty consistent between the two. So any questions or thoughts?
Did you say when this is going to be up and running?
Yeah, we are hoping to have it up and running by January 1st.
Okay.
The racial disparity piece is done. Like I said, it's just vetted. So there's sort of a question mark of if we're going to release that at the same time, or if that will kind of take you to an under construction page. But it is coming very soon.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, so I think we're gonna release the prison usage piece and the sentencing, all the pieces that you saw just now. We're aiming for that January 1st date, and then we'd like to do some additional outreach with some of our grantees on the racial disparity page. And then from there, with that feedback, we'll incorporate that feedback and then bring it to you all for approval, because ultimately, part of the reason why we're designing this is because you all requested a tool to take a look at racial disparities. And so we believe it's a tool that fits the needs that you all identified, but ultimately we'd like your feedback on that. So that'll be early next year when we try and schedule that meeting. So for next grant cycle, we will probably do just as we have done in the past, take static screenshots of the dashboards, just so it's easier to use in a PowerPoint. But if at any point you'd like to, well, let's dig into Deschutes County. We can pause the PowerPoint, go to the dashboard, and then poke around that way, just like how you saw that some information pops up when you hover. Those are things that we can do during the grant review process.
If there are no further questions, I'll give Ian the screen back.
Thanks, Gary.
Thank you all.
All right, so I will go ahead and share my screen again. But while I'm pulling that up, I wanted to let you know that we did model the 15% cut to the 3 counties, and that was actually too much of a cut. So the almost perfect cut is, well, actually, so the perfect cut is 12.3278%. So let's say a little bit more than 12%, 12.3%. cut to the 3 largest counties gets you even with funding. For ERCO, that would result in, so their request was a little shy of $58,000. And so with a 12% cut and change, that we would be funding them $41,000. For Oregon Crime Victim Services, or Crime Victims Law Center, sorry, their ask was a little bit more than $20,000. And so with this cut, they would receive funding for a little more than $15,000. And then for Multnomah County, for Marion and Washington County, this would further, the biggest impacts for them would be in their probation officer requests. So we would be funding a smaller portion of their gender specific and then racially specific probation officers.
I personally feel like your team's done as good a job as they can of like parsing out and trimming and stuff. And I'm not averse to the 12 point lot of
Yeah.
percent. But that's just my personal feeling. So
Others?
This is Sheriff Mike Reese. Lisa, do you want to put that in the form of a motion?
sure, I will. Let's see, I move to accept the staff's base recommendations. In addition to that, we've reduced Marion County by 1 additional month. You know what, I'm not going to do that. The base recommendations was scenario 1 as outlined and as needed for Ian and his team to like make the exact dollars and cents work. I would move to accept that recommendation. Put that in the form of a motion. I don't know.
I'll
I
second.
want to give you the leeway to make the dollars and cents change that you've had to come back to us previously
Thank you.
to do.
I'll second the recommendation.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any discussion on the motion? Okay, seeing no discussion, I'll go ahead and do a roll call. We do not have Senator Przanski and Commissioner Bozovich present, but I'll ask for the vote in case they joined. Okay, DA Perlow,
Aye.
Chief Scales, also I believe not present. Sheriff Reese,
Aye.
and then, oh, right, Justice Nelson unfortunately does not get a vote. Lisa Norton,
Yes.
same with Representative Krupp, no vote, unfortunately. Nate Gowiran,
Yes.
Sarah Stewart.
Aye.
Okay, and that passes unanimously then. Thank you very much.
Good job, team.
Can you tell I have COVID? I don't know if it was obvious, but
I'm just glad we're not in person. I think Patty had mentioned being in person. I'm glad we're not in person, given your status. So
I didn't know. I hope you have a mild symptoms and a speedy recovery. Sorry about that, Ian.
thanks. Yeah, I made it 2.5, almost 3 years, but yeah, so bad timing. Well, I suppose it's better. It could be, over the holidays. So.
Or during the primary rounds. But once again, as always, your team is amazing. I want to thank you for making our job so much easier, even though these are never easy decisions. Thank you so much to you and your team on behalf of me, at least. And hope you feel so much better, Ian. You're making me empathetic. I want to go take a cough syrup for you. So
I might go take a nap after this. So anyways. All right. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thanks, Ian.